Hello, and thanks for allowing me to talk to you today. I hope this talk on advanced press tips gets you thinking about how important it is to show and tell everyone about yourself and your game, to consider crafting and presenting the story of yourself just as carefully as you would your game. I also think it is very important to know journalists by face and name, and this talk will be a great exercise for you to start building this mental database. Indies have shared tons of tools to help future devs get on their feet and get press. There are plenty of things you can and should do, like everyone else, to build a solid foundation to make it easier for consumers, press, and even publishers to find out about you and your game. Definitely follow these tips, but don't expect them to make your game or your story interesting enough to become an article. Don't expect them to even get that message out there. Instead, you must tell everyone your story on every social platform you can think of, including in real life. Someone might hear about your game or you and become your champion. Word of mouth is powerful. The first unannounced game I found for Indie Fun was not from digging in forums, but by a recommendation. These devs told someone about their game, and he felt it was worth bringing to my attention. Thanks for the tip, Brett Cutler. I'm pretty fortunate to have met so many awesome people. I started my career in games working with developer Dejoban, learning about indie biz dev. I went to work on several indie helping UBM tech brands, including Indie Royale, Indie Games, GDC Vault, and IGF. I freelanced at IGN and Touch Arcade. I coordinated showcase events, Alt Control GDC in 2014, and Minecon Indies last year. I've been organizing the mix since 2012 with Justin Woodward and Joel Druskin during GDC, E3, and this week at SIGGRAPH. I'm now a consultant for indies, offering design and marketing feedback, and I find games needing financial support for Indie Fun, the awesome publisher alternative created by the devs behind World of Goo, Braid, Journey, and more. Today, I wanted to introduce you to some of the people I've met who want to write about you. When you attend future mixes and other networking events, I think it's imperative to know what to look like and what they look for as individuals, and to not think of them as a singular press entity lumped together. Press is a term similar to indies in that it serves to describe a group's functions generally, but it does little to inform you of anyone specifically. When an indie and press person meet out in the wild, or electronically, identifying each other's roles merely gets things going, just as it is media's job to ask questions to find out about you. It's your job to interest them in wanting to talk to you. Think about ways to make learning about your game or you as fun, engaging, and thought-provoking as possible. As seasoned gamers, I bet press are pretty smart folks with a skill or two honed by all those years of playing. How can you tap into those skills when they find out about your game? That's for you to brainstorm. You might also want to use as much care in your marketing and outreach as you do in making your game. Title screens and intros can really get you pumped for a game. How can you do that in an email or online or some other way to interact with the press? I think GIFs are one way to help. What's a GIF? It's short for Graphics Interchange Format, and is a simple way to make your game photos look like a video game. That is, something in motion. Even Twine games have text in motion, suggesting that we like seeing things animated when we engage with games. GIFs can make your tweets, emails, websites, Tumblrs, and more pop, and don't take years to load now thanks to advances of the internet. As we learn about our first journalist, he suggests that making your game attractive with GIFs is only part of building your appeal. Jamin Warren, founder of Killscreen, a print magazine and website, told me that he's all about photos, but not of games, of devs. Mr. Killscreen says, I tell designers that they should look on Pitchfork and find out what style they like and follow that. Having great photography cultivates an image, and if that image is design forward, that makes my site look a lot better. He uses his own photo as an example and continues, if smaller designers don't get out in front, then editorial sites will just use whatever they can, and I'm sure that random Facebook or DeviantArt profile pic is probably not what you want spreading throughout the web. On a macro level, I think people want to know who's making their games. I think that's important to the medium that they recognize who's responsible for the work. So, from Jamin's advice, I think before you even make contact with press, consider having an easy way for them to find out about you, and consider the image of yourself as much as your game. One edge over AAA is that you get to be an open book. You just have to find the journalists who want to work with those angles and how to present the best parts of your open book. Let's tackle a big site now. Note that IGN is more than a game news site. Landing on IGN among all the big-time pop culture news is tough, so if you pitch to executive editor Justin Davis, value his time, and respect his wishes for a traditional pitch. A quote from Justin: "Fancy press kits are cute, as are personalized Facebook messages, and so on. But the truth is that the best shot to get your game covered is to email and include a clear, concise, straight-to-the-point note breaking down your game. Include an easy-to-find link to your trailer. Then make sure your trailer gets straight to the point. When I receive unsolicited cold email pitches, what I have time to do is read 2 sentences about what the game is, then skip to the trailer, and then skip to 20 seconds into the trailer and hope that by that point, the trailer's showing some gameplay." So, you probably don't want to introduce yourself to Justin for the first time with a teaser or with a trailer that isn't gameplay packed then. And considering how few words you get for that first impression, don't exhaust them with humility either. Quoting Justin again, "Don't defeat yourself before you begin. I get too many emails that start with, 'I know you're busy, but,' or 'I know you typically don't go for this sort of thing, but.' Instead, just state why your game is rad and then show it off via media. It's my job to solicit pitches, so you don't need to apologize for sending one in." Justin's really just asking for the minimum that most journalists want. He's letting you know to trim your lexical and trailer hedges down before you send him the game. Our next editor appreciates a blend of convention and non-convention, and often writes stories that exist because of how open indies can be. Joystick's Jess Condit loves to receive email pitches that use Rami Ismail's press kit. Now, I caution you to avoid thinking the press kit and a press release are all you need to get coverage, though, because I've seen tons of games where this wasn't enough. Spend time making games, not press, as the press kit slogan goes, isn't entirely accurate. Rami, rightfully so, spends his time making press by giving tons of talks, keeping appearances of himself in his games in the real world and via social media for press to continue to talk about him. Today we're going to discuss ways to get the attention of these talented writers and ways to avoid pissing them off. For Jess, don't hit her up on Twitter for the pitch. She wants to see what people are excited to talk about on Twitter. So spend your time figuring out how you or your game can become the topic of conversation there. In this first video, Jess considers a few unconventional ways she hears about games outside of email pitches.
But a few unconventional ways that I've found games. Game jams. I know most devs don't go into game jams thinking that they will work on this game for the next few years. They're game jams. They're supposed to be 2 days, right? But game jams are how I found out about Titan Souls, which was my game of E3 this year. That's wild. Definitely getting your talent and skills and vision as a developer into these bite-sized competitions, that's a great method for getting your name out there. And we are paying attention to these things. Also, local developer meetups. If you are talking to developers in your area and showing your game off and talking about concepts and cool things, these conversations will make their way to places like Twitter, where I will see developers talking to each other about these cool new things happening. And I do pay attention to that as well. So basically, get your game and get your talent in front of as many people as possible, in as many ways as possible. And I will hear about it.
So to recap, Joysticks Jess is all about game jams. She also has ways of hearing about your game from local developer meetups and discussions on Twitter, and she encourages you to get your game and your talent in front of people in as many ways as possible, so that organically it rises above the noise. Similar to game jams, I think anyway, is how Jess likes her early access, beta, alpha, and all the other types of unfinished games. Take a listen.
Now, in terms of early access and beta and alpha builds, yes, I would say please send those to press. I enjoy getting some early looks at games. But I will say that I appreciate more a 2-minute working build of a game rather than a 30-minute buggy build. Even if it's just one scene of a game, even if it's just a bite-sized bit, a little teaser, if it works, that's better than something longer and buggy. So if you can, totally carve out a little chunk of the game, make it work, make it polished, just a little bit more than it is in the beta or alpha or whatever build, and think about sending that out, because it really can say a lot about your skills and the vibe you're going for.
I think this concept of having a good game jam sized early build for Jess to play might conflict with what you think should be in early builds. That is, that there's some magical amount of content needed to equal that price that you're charging for early access to your game. However, think about the quality of that content rather than the quantity, and the impression that your game, once installed, can quickly make. Loading screens and title screens should probably still be catchy here, even if not final, instead of boring placeholders. Along with a good first impression, think about how your game can deliver a solid final impression to even your unfinal game. Have a good, clear ending for the journalist to know that the rest of the content is unpolished, but allow consumers or whomever to fiddle around with the rest of the stuff after that point. Next, from someone on what to do with your game after it releases. As the senior news editor for Giant Bomb, Patrick Klepek relies on word of mouth, digital or otherwise, to find games. All these curators save him time from digging through the trenches so he can focus on his own curated Twitter, Tumblr, and smaller blog feeds to see what games are catching people's interest. Catching his own interest after releasing on early access or when your game's gone gold is a bit of a different process, though.
If a game wants to get my attention after it's come out, or it's gotten done with early access, or in the midst of early access, like if it's gotten through sort of the traditional high points that would sort of encompass a media cycle, if we want to use a crass marketing term, is a good story. And I don't mean a good game story. I don't mean the story being told in the game. I mean stories about the experience of making the game, what players are doing with it. Things like that are hooks that can be interesting outside the context of the game's release, in which compelling stories are told, both for the benefit of the website that can tell an interesting story that then generates traffic, which then gets ad revenue, which then makes the writer happy in their job they have to kind of do on a day-to-day basis, and the transaction there for the developers that hopefully drives attention to their game and then drives sales. After the fact, you want to try as the developer to identify interesting stories. Like if maybe you have to run that by other people because you might be too close to it, but what I'm always looking for, what I'm always seeking are interesting human stories, is illuminating the players, illuminating the developers, like trying to give people an understanding of what's going on and grounding that in actual people. And I'm not above hearing pitches from developers who think, hey, this could be interesting, because I can't find all that stuff on my own. I can't track all that down. And if some community members are doing something really cool that you think is worth pointing out, you don't want to over-pitch. But if you trust a journalist and think they might be receptive to it, go for it, because we're always looking for interesting stories, and I'm willing to accept those from the most unlikely places. And that's potentially an opportunity where your game could get written about in a context that is now beyond height interest for the game because the game's coming out, and it might just be on its face interesting to share on its own, and as a byproduct of that, could get a little more attention for the game itself.
So to recap, post-release or post-early access games that aren't hot items themselves can work different angles to become a story. Discuss unique angles around your game dev process for sure, but you should also explore what players are doing with your game, where you see their interests peak, and even be honest in how those realities contrast with your own expectations. Share the human stories about your players and yourselves to get the news train going. Pro tip here, if you just want to write about your own biz dev experience, Gamasutra's member blogs are free and a great way to get attention too. There's still a curation process there by Christian Nutt as to what stories percolate, but it's a good practice for you to ferret out your own experiences and maybe even get some reactions from developers. Polygon senior reporter Tracy Lin has written myriad of stories about indies. She says, independent developers often email me download codes for their games with a fact sheet without telling me why I should spend time with their game instead of someone else's. Those emails tend to go to the bottom of the heap because I don't have time for trial and error. If your game does something groundbreaking, tell me what it is. If your game or studio has an interesting history or story, be upfront about it. Journalists aren't mind readers. We don't know you or your product as well as you do. Tracy gets her leads from everywhere, too. I find this following anecdote to echo my own belief that you should show your game and tell your story to everyone. You never know who they know or how they might champion your game. From Tracy, I asked a friend of mine for recommendations for indie developers to interview. He recommended Adam Rippon, who had recently released Dragon Fantasy on iOS. I looked at the game, and it was neat, but I didn't know if it was worth meeting up with Adam to talk about it, especially since role-playing games are a dime a dozen. My friend then mentioned that Dragon Fantasy's lead character was based on Adam's father, who had died a year earlier. And that was the crumb I needed to get me on the trail. I went on to write 2 feature stories and multiple news stories about Adam and his games, and it was all because he gave me a story worth writing about. Had no one mentioned the connection between the game's character and his father, I don't know if I would have discovered it for myself. Our next writer, also hailing from the powerful Polygon, wouldn't have discovered the personal story of 24 Karat's Matt Gilgenbach without the developer reaching out to share bits of himself, instead of some cookie-cutter fact list about his game.
My favorite example of indie dev PR is Matt Gilgenbach. He ran 24 Karat Games, which made Retrograde, and then he formed Infinitap, which is working on a game called Never Ending Nightmares. He emailed me when he was having troubles with his game, and just sort of walked me through what he was experiencing and how it was affecting his life, and just kind of getting the conversation going, sharing his experiences. And I think that a lot of indies try to promote themselves like they're a larger project than they are, and I think that they lose the opportunity for a real, genuine emotional connection with someone in the press, because they're showing they have a game, they're not showing they have a story. And one strength that indies really have, I think, is showing they have a story, and being able to market that. I know it's a little more personal, I know that's more challenging for some people, but that's the kind of way you can make a connection with a reporter who's really going to champion your project. Since then, I have written several news stories about Matt and done 2 features about him just because I like him and I like his story and I had a connection with it.
Alright, I'll level with you here. Your life might not have that hook that Adam Rippon and Matt Gilgenbach had. What do you do when you feel that your life story just isn't that interesting? Well, like your game, I think you can iterate on yourself. Think about life all around you, life outside the realm of games. Open yourself up to doing something different, associate or connect something with games that you haven't heard of before. You could probably walk down the street and see tons of things that you just don't have as close a connection to games as, say, Hollywood, household pets, or those generic occupations like cops and lawyers do. If you want to make a newsworthy game, in short, I think consider making a game that isn't a simple deviation from what games are already about and what stories have already been told. Make a list of everything you think a game could have or be about. Travel the world like Sarah Colin Northway, if you can. Run this list by a few friends to see what stands out. Maybe this exercise will inform your game design, or at least make you a more interesting person to interview. Maybe. Or maybe you're just not that confident in asserting yourself, nor interested in the world outside your office. There are some writers out there who enjoy the thrill of the hunt for your game. This guy, who I dubbed the Hunter, as a special type of indie writer, always kept me on my toes when it came to finding indie games. Turns out for Chris Priestman, he makes it a game of finding games. He says, "The ones I remember vividly and associate more with joy in retrospect are those that I've found myself. A sense of ownership can be had over those games I've discovered in a forum or a Tumblr page or on Twitter, I suppose. I could say to myself that I found that game." While contacting me is a very good idea, another good idea is to spread word about your game elsewhere, as I may ignore lots of words in an email, but will scour the web every day, and that only ups the chances of me writing about it. Having a game part of Screenshot Saturday comes to mind as a way to get your game out there in the wild, but that almost seems too easy for a guy like Chris. I asked him how devs should use Tumblr effectively. He said hashtags are good, but he mostly follows Tumblr wherever it and his curiosity lead him. I think another writer in the school of Tim W. and Chris is Chloe Rad, and it's not surprising to see that she's shined in places Chris is too. She doesn't cringe at press releases, if done a bit personally. Speaking with Chloe, she says, "One great thing you can do as a developer is personalize your press releases. It can take a good amount of extra work, and it isn't required, but I love getting emails from developers who have taken the time to get to know me through my writing and can pitch their game in a way that appeals to me. The amount of emails I get a week about my new retro-style, top-down, roguelike space shmup makes it really hard for those descriptors to mean anything special to me anymore. But when the developer makes an effort to explain why this game will be interesting to me or my readers, it feels more inviting." So I hope you've learned, or you've enjoyed learning a bit about each writer's proclivities, and I think it's something we should do more often, on a person-by-person basis. If nothing else, I think I've etched their faces in your brain so you can find them in a crowded room or email them and approach them how they want to be approached. Building relations with press, you only need to make them care about you or your game, and the other part comes along naturally when a proper writer completes his or her story on you. Now, I know y'all are due a lunch break, but for those who want to hear about how journalists handle exclusive stories and even how to get on GameSpot's The Lobby, stick around for another 10 minutes or so. And we're coming back. Next up, Mary Kish from GameSpot's live streaming show, The Lobby, actually loves exclusives. She says they also love having devs come into the San Francisco studio, that this adds to the entertainment value. If that's not possible, devs can be in the live chat to make things interesting with the comments. For The Lobby, Mary advocates reaching out even earlier than most, with 2 to 3 weeks allowing her time to pitch your exclusive offerings to the team.
The Lobby is not produced by one person. It's a group of people, and we actually pitch our ideas to see what is best for the show. One thing that I would really recommend is to help me pitch your game to the rest of the producers by giving me an exclusive or some kind of unique aspect that sets your game apart from the others. A lot of times people always ask, what is the value of an exclusive of an indie game, as opposed to AAA? And the reality is that any exclusive is actually really valuable for large sites. We're always looking for someone that can give us a new level that's never been seen, a new character. They're going to show off a boss fight. Those things are really special to us, and we take them really seriously. So if you can offer us any kind of exclusive, you can offer us additional keys. If you can offer us that during the live show that you will be in the comments answering questions from the people that are watching live, that helps me tell to the rest of the producers that this is a really good addition to the show, and it's worth doing. So that's an amazing thing that you can offer me that will help us cover your game. And third, I would say is that, a lot of times we see a lot of games and it's so easy to just play it and cover it and go over the basics. How do you play? How do you level up? Things like that. But they don't always make for entertaining shows. And we're looking for entertainment value when we pick our games. So something that you can do is to help give us a reason that makes your segment more unique than a standard how do you play and what is your game. For example, when we covered Cannon Brawl, we could have easily gone through a long tutorial about how you play and what the game is. What we did was we had a competition between myself and another host and made us fight to the death with money on the table. And that's a really good way that also explains the mechanics of the game, but there's this level of entertainment that makes it more enjoyable and much more valuable. And that's the kind of stuff we want in the show. So if you have a way to track how long it takes to finish a level and you want to challenge someone to a speed run, now you've upped the level of entertainment and you've given us more to work with than just what is this game and how do you play.
So to recap from Mary, in pitching an exclusive to GameSpot's The Lobby, think about how to make your game interesting from maybe an esports or broadcasting perspective. What will make people want to tune in to the segment about your game? What makes it good television or good live streaming vision compared to finding a random trailer or gameplay clip that you've already shared online? That's for streaming. But are there people in the written press that want exclusives? Let's see. Exclusives for news or features are a weird beast. I loved getting them and finding them, and I really loved seeing great stories properly sourced by other sites when they deemed that story was worth writing about. However, these handsome gents tend to differ. Justin Davis of IGN, pictured left, says, exclusives matter very little in the context of indies specifically. If we set up an exclusive reveal with a bigger company, we're assured that they'll be pushing their significant audience to the piece. We do the same, and everyone wins. But with smaller indies, they don't have an audience that can point to our piece. So whether we run the trailer as a first look exclusive or run the trailer with every other outlet has very little impact on views from our perspective. Patrick Klepek of Giant Bomb, pictured in the middle, says that they don't really deal in exclusives either. He adds that that's a very old media way of interacting with game developers and publishers. These days, personality is king, and it forms the backbone of Giant Bomb. That extends to the stories we want to tell about games, too. While we're not averse to premiering material first if it happens to fall into our wheelhouse, creating a website solely around the idea of exclusive content that is negotiated with publishers, is not particularly interesting. Speaking more specifically to independent games, I'd rather have access. Let me play your game, even if it's broken. Justin McElroy on Polygon, pictured right, says an exclusive usually only counts if it's got a name attached that people recognize. He says, I'm of the opinion that indies should be taking coverage wherever they can get it, and exclusives can be a double-edged sword in that they can disincentivize others to cover the game. What an exclusive means for every other outlet is that they have to link to the competition, which they'll only do if they have to. If it's a game people aren't already desperate to hear about, then they won't. With that said, maybe those who like to hunt for games like to hunt for juicy exclusives too. Chris Priestman on the left says, exclusives feel like an unnecessary hangover from print press to me. Most of the time, the exclusiveness of the coverage will last only a matter of hours, and that's how the online world works. To me, these exclusives often tend to be quite boring, and the exclusivity doesn't seem to add anything compelling to the coverage. That happens when, say, the articles focus entirely on the exclusive announcement and not much else. This is an easy angle for the journalist. Here's an exclusive, and it may in turn make them lazy. What is preferable is to try to get as much press bandwidth as possible by telling as many people about your game as possible. This means that the journalist has to come up with an interesting angle to make people want to read about the game on their publication over another. As a result, this may result in much better, read interesting, coverage of your game. Chloe Rad says, exclusives don't personally interest me at all, and I would actually encourage up-and-coming developers to stay away from them. What you can do, though, is familiarize yourself with different game news outlets and their usual interests and angles. Work with them to generate a story idea that the specific outlet would run. Maybe one site wants a business, another is more interested in your game's story or art, and another wants to know who the developers are as people. Latch onto what makes each outlet distinct and give them something to grab their unique audience's attention. Phew. Surely someone doesn't think that exclusives are bad.
Offering exclusives to press is a cool thing. I enjoy getting exclusive offers because I do enjoy presenting information that no one else has. That's kind of my job, is to tell people cool things. I love it. So I will respond to exclusive requests, but only if I already like the game. So an exclusive is not a guaranteed ride on any website, I would think, especially not for me. If I'm not into the game, I'm not going to take the exclusive. And if I'm into a game, I don't always need an exclusive. So figure out what works for you. If it's in your marketing strategy to offer me or anyone else an exclusive, go for it. Definitely, that's fine. You might as well try. But no, it's not going to be your saving grace, necessarily. But give me a week to respond, especially if it's an exclusive request. Give me a week. During that week, if I haven't responded, ping me one more time. Say, hey, just checking if you saw this. And if I haven't responded after a week, go ahead and move on and pitch it to someone who might be interested, because that's basically me saying I'm going to pass. I do try to respond, however, to every pitch I get.
So other writers echo Joystick's Jess Condit's sentiment that they all look at the exclusive you're offering, but only nudge them once in a week and accept their silence as a no thank you otherwise. Don't. Shame, guilt, or repeatedly bug the journalist for not covering your game. This makes a bad and sometimes lasting impression of you. Tom Sykes, who writes on PC Gamer, also shared a word of warning about the follow-up. He says, please don't use this space to say how much you need the coverage or how you're struggling to make ends meet. That's an unfair tactic, and it won't affect the decision to cover your game. So when emails don't work, sometimes the best way to get exposure is to just expose yourself. This includes several things, but the last tip I wanted to share surround the demoing of your game at live events. Yes, one of the most expensive parts of game dev can be live events. Though things like the mix, and getting your game selected for things like PAX 10, Indiecade, or IGF can help curtail those costs. However, events don't always have to cost you much at all, as long as you know where journalists are and you are making it easy for them to find you and find out about you. Chloe Rad speaks about this and makes another case for word of mouth. She covered Push Me Pull You, which she spotted at GDC this year because of a guy named Harry Lee who was walking around with a laptop and some controllers, letting people demo it. She says, tons of people got the chance to play the game at a point where there was pretty much no information about it online. So when the developers finally did start circulating info about it, shortly after GDC, it was met with loads of real sincere hype for the game from people who had actually gotten the chance to experience it the way it was meant to be experienced. Instead of a bullet point list of game features, people had these personal stories, anecdotes, and inside jokes fueling interest before journalists were even mailed a press kit. So that's an example of doing live right. We'll wrap up things today with a note from Polygon's Justin McElroy about how to do events wrong.
I can't stand it, and I know how this is going to make me sound, so don't email me and tell me how bad this sounds, because I know how it sounds. I can't stand it when I go to a small booth where it's like a one-person or two-person team, and I think, oh, this looks kind of interesting, I'll check it out, and they act like they couldn't care less whether or not I was there. I know, you get tired throughout the day, I get it, but let me let you in on a secret. I'm an egomaniac. Most everybody in the press is. They want to feel like they're doing something, they're having an impact, they're helping someone who needs their help, that needs a megaphone, that needs a mouthpiece. When devs act like they couldn't care if I was there or not, it drives me crazy, and I usually don't write about them because I'm a monster and an emotional disaster. So act like it's a big deal that someone wants to write about your game no matter what outlet they're from, because you never know where the support is going to come from.
So I hope you see that there isn't just one way to get press, and that the humans writing about you are as diverse as you and your games. Recognize that diversity. Target people instead of outlets who you think you want to tell your story. They are listening to you and all the people around you, so tell them about you and your game too. Thanks for listening.